Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the SmartWealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Hello, everybody. My name is Thane Stenner. I'm the host of the BNN Bloomberg SmartWealth monthly podcast, where I get the distinct pleasure to interview some thought leaders, pioneers in different industries, and professionals from various backgrounds, including entrepreneurs. So this is a very exciting day for me to be able to host actually this interview. My special guest today is Jennifer Risher. She's based in San Francisco, and her and her husband. And prior to that, she was a native that grew up in Seattle or Bellevue, Washington area, I believe. So today's topic is around talking openly or appropriately around significant wealth. And this is a topic that a lot of our clients and prospective clients seem to bring up frequently. So my guest today, Jennifer Risher, is somebody that's written a book about this titled "We Need to Talk," a memoir about wealth. So with that in mind, Jennifer, welcome to today's recording.
Thank you, Thane. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, you and I had a brief intro or prep call a few weeks ago, and I was quite invigorated by the discussion that we had. And I'm actually really looking forward to this particular podcast. So with this in mind, Jennifer, do you mind sharing with our viewers and our listeners today about your background and story? And let's get started.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah, when I was 25, I got really lucky. I joined Microsoft, and I met my husband, David, in orientation. I also got stock that was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. David's stock was worth millions. 6 years after we first met, we were married. We were both still working at Microsoft and about to have a baby. And David decided he wanted to take a job at a small, sort of unknown startup that was selling books on the internet called Amazon.com. And he was the 37th employee. We were in our early 30s, and suddenly we had more money than we could really wrap our heads around, which of course is amazing. I'm incredibly fortunate, but my identity was at stake. I wasn't worried about people liking me for our money. I was worried about them hating me for it. I didn't want anyone to know.
Interesting. And so this, over a period of time, led you to writing a book called "We Need to Talk," a memoir about wealth. So maybe let's go there right away. Like, how long was this book in the making?
It was a long time in the making, and there was a long period of time where I didn't talk about money. And kind of looking back, I wish I had kind of gotten more comfortable more quickly. So the book was really me kind of working through a lot of the emotional aspects of new wealth, of changing from one kind of socioeconomic status into another, of being around family members who had different income levels, friends, feeling a worry about being judged and keeping kind of secrets, which of course, it can be exhausting. And when you don't talk about something, when you keep it hidden, that's kind of where shame grows. That's uncomfortable. Also, when you don't talk with family members or friends, you tend to make assumptions and tell yourself stories rather than actually really connecting and learning about what's really going on. So kind of to answer your question about how long it took to write the book, it first took me a long time to kind of get more comfortable. And part of getting comfortable with our new fortune was writing about it. And it took a long time to write my book and get it published and get it out there in the world. But I'm very happy now to be talking about it.
So in some ways, it sounds like it was a therapeutic process for you.
It was therapeutic, and actually it was the book I needed and wanted to read, because I looked around. First of all, I couldn't talk to friends. I didn't feel comfortable talking to friends. So I was like, where's the book that tells me how to deal with the emotions that are coming up, how to talk to my parents, how am I going to keep from spoiling my kids? How do I approach philanthropy? Where is the human story here? And I didn't see any books talking about these kinds of things. So I decided I needed to write my story, because I knew it's a rare situation, but it's not unique, and there are others like me. So I really wrote it as therapy for myself, but really to help other people as well, because I think we really learn from each other's stories. And in most other situations in our lives, at least I do, if I have a problem or a question around parenting, or, how am I going to help support my older parents? Or I talk to all my friends, I gather data, I hear different perspectives, I just talk about it. And it felt very uncomfortable to me to talk. And there's sort of a taboo in our society. At least I grew up feeling that it was very impolite to talk about money.
Interesting. So, just a little bit of an offshoot question here. Was your husband um, uncomfortable as well talking about it, or did he have a different upbringing or background that kind of allowed him to be a little bit more comfortable doing so?
He was also uncomfortable. I mean, we both had a little bit of a different background. Both of us, I mean, I grew up very kind of with middle class values, saving my pennies, a little bit wary of those rich people. And he grew up without a lot of money. He grew up his mom was a single mom. So, it was a little bit of a different situation, but both of us felt uncomfortable talking. We could talk to each other, but feeling the worry about sort of judgment with friends, or he had a hard time kind of addressing this issue with his mother, and we kind of had to work through, how much do we give her? Do we give her money? What's the best way to approach that? And it took a long time before we kind of even were able to approach that.
Interesting. So your book was published in September 2020. So, coming up on roughly 3.5 years or so. So what's been your focus since the publication or the book came out?
A couple of different things. I think one of the keys to talk, one of the reasons I think it's so important to talk about money is that, when we get more comfortable with our relationship with money, we can use it as a tool, and we're not trying to hide it or avoid it. And that's really what happened for me. Once I was out talking about the emotional piece around money, I was looking at our portfolio and thinking, okay, what am I doing with our money? How can I make sure that we're invested in things that are not causing harm in the world? And more than that, like, how can I use this incredible gift we have to create the kind of world I want to live in? And I started to investigate and look into ways to invest, and learned that, venture capital, it's really dominated by white men, and women get like 2% of venture capital money, which of course means that the world out there is determined. A lot of the products and services are determined by white men. And wow, there's a huge market opportunity here. And I want to shift that power dynamic and help women. And I started to invest in specifically with women of color who are fund managers. So I've been investing. Also, another place where I'm kind of using our money is through philanthropy. There's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines when there's so much need and work to be done in communities and with nonprofits. So my husband and I started something called Half My DAF, a donor advised fund, to help address the billions of dollars sitting in donor advised funds, not activated, not being put to work. We started Half My DAF in 2020. And over the last 4 years, we've moved $50 million out of DAFs to nonprofits through Half My DAF. Wow, so I think that's a key to why it's important to talk, because it's like you get more comfortable and you improve your relationship. Another piece is, I found, what I've also been doing kind of after the book was published is talking to other people like me. I've been working with wealth advisors, talking about the importance of advisors understanding and talking about money, talking about their own money story. And helping clients kind of figure out, acknowledging and validating their experience, but also helping them to, gain the confidence and recognize how much relief there is in talking to family members and ways to connect and ways to learn from each other.
Excellent. So the book itself, if somebody asked you, okay, I'm going to read We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth book, what would you say the top 3 to 5 takeaways that you really wanted to try to bring across in the book to its readers?
Well, it's really found an audience, and the audience is, people who have come into a lot of wealth, created wealth, or people who are of multi-generational wealth, next generation, multi-generation, who are experiencing some of the complexities emotionally. I mean, money is very emotional. It brings up fear, anxiety, stress. It brings up joy, pride. There's all sorts of feelings connected to this thing called wealth and money. So I'm really hoping, and I found this audience who their reaction is, thank you so much. I thought I was alone in these feelings. They feel recognized, validated. And then they also tell me, wow, okay, you've given me the courage to have that conversation I've been avoiding, the one with my sibling or the one with the grandparent or a friend. And so it's really kind of helping people recognize the importance of having those conversations, because on the other side of that conversation is really the chance to connect and find out what's really going on rather than just assuming what the other person's feeling. So it's coming away with a sense of like, okay, I have the power to start these conversations. And a lot of the things that I talk about in the book are things that other people have dealt with. Leaving work, and how do you my identity was so wrapped up in my work, and when I wasn't working, who was I? Or children. I mean, this is a big issue for people. Like, how do I ensure my children are not spoiled or not entitled? How do I keep them ambitious and motivated? This is a very big concern for parents. How much do I give them? Do I give them money? How do I make sure that they have the values that I have? So I think the book kind of helps basically normalize the experience and humanize the experience. And then for advisors or people who haven't had that experience, it's a little bit of a different read. And I think, again, I've found that my core audience has had some sort of experience. Either they have more money than they had growing up, or they have more money than others in their family. So they've experienced that discrepancy. But for advisors, I think it's a good way to help humanize the client, this person, help show some of the issues and the sticking points and the triggers. And I think it's important, again, for advisors themselves to understand their money story, because we all have a money story. It starts in our childhood. It's what we learn growing up. It's, what did your mother think about money? What was your father's approach to money? What did you learn about spending, about saving, about giving? These kind of core learnings and core values are really deep within us. And unless we're aware of kind of the emotions that come up or the way we react, we are just reacting rather than being intentional. And so the more we understand those triggers and our own biases and our own emotions that come up, we'll just be on autopilot versus really making, decisions and changing things. The emotions will be there, because I experienced it that myself. Like, my money story was all about saving. Saving was really sort of almost a moral imperative. It made me a person. So even now, when at first I think, well, wait, why was I saving? What was I saving for? Is it really true that good people save and bad people spend? Like, these things don't really logically make sense to me. But I still get that feeling, like if I'm driving around looking for parking on the street, I will circle the block, trying to find that free parking spot, because that's, what makes me a good person. Even if I'm stressed, I'm late for a meeting, I'm like getting more and more stressed. I have to override that instinct. Like, okay, it's okay. You can park in a lot. You can pay to park in a lot. And that really takes a conscious effort.
We're just going to pause here for a few moments, so stay with us.
Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the SmartWealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're back with our guest today, and we'll jump right in. Kind of interesting. You're reminding me of something I wrote in my own book back in 2001. Not trying to date myself here, but I titled the book True Wealth, and it was for two audiences, for high net worth investors, but also their advisors. So we actually share something in common there from point of view of having kind of a dual audience in the publication. And there's one phrase in there that gets repeated back to me all the time from people that kind of read the book, and that's wealth tends to amplify a person's personality, right? So kind of all these things that we get brought up with, these rules or axioms or phrases that are kind of spoken into our lives, from children, young child's age through teenagers and then to young adults, seems to kind of come out and bubble out to the surface a little bit more once this happens. So, I want to go back to a time in your life. So when Amazon went public, maybe just describe that day, what it felt like for you and your husband that day. Because now all of a sudden, on paper it's one thing, and yes, it's stock and it's in your brokerage account or investment account, and now it's publicly traded. And I know there would have been valuations leading up to that, but I mean, what did it feel like that day? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's funny. It felt like any other day, and I was, of course, like, wow. But it's interesting because when this happened, it was in 2000 or 1997. And we had we had a new baby. I was a new mother. So I was experiencing these two things. So it was like, that was an amazing, incredible experience. My heart opened to this incredible, I was blown away by motherhood. It was like this curtain had lifted. I was now in the world of motherhood. I had joined a mother's group, and we were meeting every Monday. And there was so much amazing connection between me and the other moms. We shared so much in common. I had all these peers who had, experienced or were experiencing the same thing I was. We talked about our birth stories. We talked about, sleeping, getting our babies to sleep through the night and crying it out or not, or family bed. There were so many things that we talked about, pacifiers and spit up. And so there was so much connection and a sense of belonging in that space. And then, the day that Amazon goes public and there's like, oh my gosh, that is, there was a lot of, that was like another curtain lifting. And in that space, it was a lot quieter. And I really wanted to do everything I could in my mother's group to keep that quiet. I was worried that it would make people see me differently, that people would think I didn't have any problems, or that I wasn't just another new mom. And I wanted to be connected to those women. So kind of in the name of connection, I denied kind of what was really going on. So I look back at that and I think, well, how connected was I really? And it's exhausting to kind of always try to hide what's
keep it under the covers, right? It's keeping it under the covers kind of concept. I appreciate you sharing that. I think when you said, you're keeping it quiet on that front, literally and figuratively, right? With the newborn, I'm sure lots of crying going on. And the stock clearly wasn't crying, but you were going through your own metamorphosis, I guess, with people around you. So since then until now, what would you say has been the surprises like what, and I don't want to go into any points here that you don't feel comfortable talking about, but maybe just share, because people relate to stories, um, some of the surprises along the journey so far for both you and your husband.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest surprise is like something that we all imagine is nothing but positive, um, has a lot more nuance and a lot more. It's, you're still, like you said, you're still the same person. Who you are becomes amplified because you can be, if you're obnoxious, you're going to be even more so.
Yes, yes.
So I think the biggest surprise was just the feeling of wanting to keep it hidden, worry about judgment, feeling quite isolated. I mean, even my parents, like with my parents, like I basically had become something I grew up prejudiced against. And
Gotcha.
so even though my parents knew I was at Microsoft and then David joined Amazon and they must have known what was going on, they never mentioned anything to me. And
Hmm.
so I never talked to them. And in my mind, because we weren't talking, my assumption was, oh, they're kind of looking down at me. They're looking down at our wealth. They think it's bad. They think I'm bad. I needed to keep this hidden. So there was, and there was shame there and feeling of guilt. And
Hmm.
then later on, the question that Dave and I were asking is like, well, how much should we give to our parents? How much? They didn't need the money necessarily. A story is with my brother. So my brother was a high school teacher. He at one point wanted to buy a house, and we offered him $20,000 towards his down payment, and he refused our gift. He said he
Hmm.
wanted to live within his own means.
Hmm.
And at that time, I mean, his refusal hurt my feelings. I felt
Hmm.
like he was, looking down on me and and our money, and didn't want any part of it, sort of feeling. But there, I didn't talk to him, and I should have. We didn't have a conversation. And then when he got married, we again sent a check, and he and his wife thanked us as a wedding gift. And we started giving him yearly gifts, and um, over the course of years, he stopped thanking us. And I started to feel resentful, and I started to tell myself stories. I made assumptions. I thought, oh, he's embarrassed, or he believes that we have so much it doesn't matter to us. And then at one point, I'm not proud to admit it, but I just didn't send a check. And when my brother and I were corresponding later the next year, he said at the end of an email, wondering if a certain year-end check is just late in the mail. Is it? And I was shocked to read that. It made me mad,
Yeah.
made me upset, but I realized we needed to talk. And when we got on the phone and we started a conversation, and I told him that my feelings were hurt, that he hadn't acknowledged my gifts, and he apologized right away. Like, he said he hadn't realized. And in fact, he thought it was easier for me if he didn't make a big deal out of the money, which
Hmm.
completely made sense given how we grew up.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, so this is the power of talking. Then when we were talking and connecting as two people who care about each other and really kind of
Yeah.
connect, then
Yep.
that put money in its place, not as something bigger
Ah,
than us, not as something more powerful than us, but a tool that we could use. And then we could talk about it quite easily. I said, he said, I don't need this money, but I really, really appreciate it. And I'd never asked what he was doing with it, but I said, what are you doing with it? I want to know. I want to be part of your life. And so
hmm.
that conversation was really brought us together, and it really cleared the air. And since then, we have continued to give gifts, and I've moved on. I mean, these things change, and
Evolved.
we evolve. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I really appreciate, Jen, you kind of mentioning that, because from what I've observed, and we deal with some, very significant families, financially speaking, in Canada. Um, it's fascinating to me observing, you'd think giving money would be an easy thing to do. And from what I've seen personally and professionally, it's not as easy as it may sound, because you want it to be appropriate, you want it to be um, appropriately humble, I think, in many respects. You want the other party to receive it without guilt, or et cetera, et cetera. But it's
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 more
not an easy thing to do. It's actually, but go ahead.
It is very complex because you have your own ideas and feelings, and then you really can't control what someone else is
Correct.
thinking or believing or what they're feeling. So again, another reason I think it's important for each of us to get comfortable with our own relationship with money. We can't help what other people are doing, but we can think about, how we control our own feelings or be aware of them.
Yeah. So I'm going to run another scenario by you for the benefit of the listeners and viewers. I remember facilitating a conversation with a couple that had two kids that were 9 and 13, I believe, 9-year-old son and 13-year-old daughter, in a boardroom. And so I was just facilitating questions. We spoke it was actually quite a interesting conversation. I expected it to be about an hour. It ended up being 2 hours. And those kids were really switched on. So one of the questions I asked, and I said, do either of you have questions of your parents about money and whatnot? And they said, so the daughter, super switched on daughter, she says, yeah, I kind of want to know, you know, uh, the wealth of the family, kind of when some of that will come to us when we're adults. And
Wow.
she's 13-year-old, right? And I'm like, I'm sitting there going, uh-oh, what have I, helped to facilitate here? Because she's coming out of the gates quite well. And I'd coached the parents on some responses, but so the mother responded. Mother was an entrepreneurial lady as well. She responded. She says, well, first of all, it's mom and dad's wealth. And, over time, we're going to try to equip you to receive some of it over time. But, I thought that was an interesting little juxtaposition. But there was also something else that they had shared with me prior to that meeting. When, I think the daughter had come home, and I guess the classmates were kind of saying to her, in the classroom, or, on the school facility, oh, your parents are rich. And so she went home. Well, she actually told her friends, she goes, no, we're not. No, we're not. Because she was caught off guard, didn't know how to respond to it. And she went home and she asked her parents, are we rich? And so unpacking that interaction, even on the next generation, was a fascinating little case study, because what was happening is the kids were kind of denying it when they kind of knew differently, just observing the lifestyle of the family. But they were denying it. And so in this facilitated meeting, it was asking the kids, I go, well, how did that feel for you to kind of deny that amongst your friends when you kind of generally know? And the young daughter said, well, I didn't know what else to say. And I didn't want to brag about it. And I didn't want to, share too much. So, basically that conversation led to the parents saying, well, maybe next time you're asked by your friends to say, my mom and dad have worked really hard and have done very well. And as a family, we've been blessed financially, instead of denying something, which in effect was kind of lying as a defensive mechanism. And so it was quite a breakthrough conversation. And it surprised me as to how engaging the next generation can be. And so
I think it's
go ahead.
wonderful. I love hearing this story because I love that you're having these conversations, and that everyone was engaged and the parents were talking to their children, 13 and 9. That's incredible. And that's the way it should be. And I think even giving that daughter the space to feel those feelings of like, yeah, I felt bad. I didn't know what to say, and offering her, like, being seen. We all want to be seen. And so that's
Yes.
a tricky situation when your, classmates are, poking at you or putting you in a position that feels really uncomfortable, and to have her parents support her and you support her and think about ways to answer that question. I also think for parents, like, that can be a question, if kids come home and say, Mom, are we rich? I think a lot of parents feel really uncomfortable with that. And what do they say? I think it's always kind of a nice idea to ask, get what's the question behind the question? Like,
Yes.
why are you asking that? Or did something come up for you? Because we want to
Yes.
get to what the feelings are behind those questions, and to help kids through those feelings.
We're just going to take a quick break, so we'll be right back. So please stay with us.
Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the SmartWealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now.
Well, we're back from our break, and we're with Jennifer Risher, our special guest from today. We'll jump right in. Do you care to share any other circumstance or scenario that was kind of firsthand?
Well, for us, I think since we're talking about kids and talking, when our daughters were growing up, they're now in their 20s, mid-20s, we were always very clear that we were very fortunate. And I think it's really about attitude and gratitude. I get asked a lot, like, well, what if we want to go first class, or we want to, travel in luxury? It's like, well, that's fine. I mean, it's really, if you're living your values, your kids are watching you. And if you're, the way you respond to the things you're able to do, your kids are going to pick that up too. So if you're being entitled and you feel like it's, of course we deserve this and we deserve that and we're better than this, they'll pick that up. But if you are grateful and have a sense of gratitude and your attitude is open and you talk about how fortunate you are, how your kids pick that up as well. So that's really,
I agree. I definitely agree. Definitely.
So with our daughters, the point for me was when our oldest daughter was going to college, and I was thinking, okay, we really should have more conversation about what's going on. And it was overwhelming. I didn't know where to start because I didn't get that modeled to me from my parents, and I wasn't seeing, who do I talk to about like the problem of having so much money and talking to your kids about it. So I hadn't talked about to people, and we recognized, we need to talk to people. So we actually reached out to several couples who were in similar positions, a little bit ahead of us, and we said, for dinner. And this is another thing about conversation. It's like, if you open the door, people are eager. They're very interested to know what their peers are doing, get ideas, to get advice, and to hear different options. So when we said, will you talk to us about money and how you're thinking about it with your kids? We had couples like, yes, please. And we had 3 incredible dinners with 3 different couples, and everyone had a little bit of a different approach, but hearing from each of these different couples helped us form our own approach. Like, one couple was very formal. They had introduced their children to their financial advisors. They had written letters about to tell them about the money set aside for college and money set aside in a trust, and really made it, this is your money, and started to build that relationship between the advisor and the children. Another couple had wrestled a lot with, do we do individualized gifts to each of our 3 children? And we really care about housing. Maybe we give it, they ended up giving a chunk of money, same chunk of money amount to each of their 3 children. And each of the children had done something different. One bought a big house, one bought a smaller house and put it in the bank. Like, so that was interesting. And then a third couple said, well, basically it's our money, not theirs. And that's another data point for us. And it really helped us have that first conversation with our daughters. And we did formalize it. We said, tonight when we went out for dinner, and we said, we're going to talk about money. And we had a conversation. It was mostly around, the money set aside for their college. We said there's another chunk of money set aside in a trust. And we had a really interesting conversation about that money set aside for college. And our older daughters was like, well, what if we want to go on to college, on to get a higher ed degree, master's or something? And I mean, what if we don't use all the money? And that got us started to think how important it is to listen to the next generation. That was a great question. What does happen if they don't use the money? And we kind of had a conversation, and maybe it could go to a cousin, and then we kind of looked into it. And so it really started a dialogue, which I think is really important between generations.
It actually leads perfectly into my next question of you, Jennifer, and that's the definition of fairness, or what's fair, even between, financial gifts to family members, and how people kind of respond to that, or even how our kids respond to that. So how do you look at what's fair, given that maybe some of the like your two daughters, for example, one may want to start a business or is already in a business. One may be a school teacher that, isn't in business, but still has financial requirements. So how do you,
I've had this question before, like a couple was asking about this sort of similar experience where one child had gone on and was going to do very well with the business they had chosen, and while the other had chosen a profession that wasn't lucrative. And how do you deal with that? Like, you don't want to penalize the one who is like making more money, and how do you? And there's no right or wrong answer here. And I think it's really looking at the children that you have. And I think they decided, because one of the kids was asking for money, that if they gave that child a gift, they were going to give it to the other child as well, and to keep it quite equal and fair in that way. That's, certainly for us at this point, we've just split things and made it very equal between the two girls. I think another piece there is like making sure that the next gen are in communication and talking to each other and building that trust as two adults, so that that's another place where things can fall apart. But I think, making sure that our daughters are talking to each other about the situation and how they feel. They're two different people, of course. Different attitudes towards money, a different money story than I have. So it's like, just keeping that, again, getting back to talking, it's keeping that communication open, because it's all about humans. We're all here.
Well, I agree. And I think, you mentioned earlier about, one bought a larger house, one bought a smaller house and banked it. That's kind of money personalities right there coming out, right? In how they actually act with it. And, it shows a mindset of each one of them individually, which is kind of cool. So charities, okay, you've already mentioned donor advised funds and some of your own philosophy there. From what I've observed, we have helped kind of facilitate a lot of larger donations to different charities of clients' choice over the years. How, like, when parties kind of go through a liquidity event, they tend to, the charities tend to do the research, they tend to do their homework, and they tend to come knocking. So how did you and your husband over time kind of filter out which charities to give to and which not to, and how? Like, did you do matching gifts? Did you maybe just share a little bit around that?
Well, I have a lot to say here, a lot of thoughts.
Okay.
I think starting is, it's not responding. I mean, there is a piece about how to respond to people who are making requests, but I think when it comes to like how you want to think about giving or partnering with different organizations, I think you have to start by looking inside and figuring out what really matters to you, what causes call to you, what problem in the world do you want to solve. Figure that out, because if you are really in touch with something that you're passionate about, you're going to be more effective. You're going to be more engaged long term. You're going to be more. So that's all important. So it's like starting with what you care about, I think is key. And I think there's a kind of an idea that, once everyone knows you have money, they're all going to be asking you for money. I don't think that's exactly the case. I mean, with the nonprofits we support, I think of us as partners. And I think there's respect on both sides. And yes, we do get solicited, but I think there's also we have to learn to say no. And it's actually much better for a nonprofit to hear no than to hear nothing. My husband co-founded and ran a nonprofit, World Reader, for 14 years, and he did a lot of fundraising. And the worst case scenario was, going after someone or talking to someone who's been a donor and wanting to find out where they stand and getting strung along and not hearing that no. It's so much better if you tell the person who's asking, no, I'm sorry. I mean, you can say I'm focused on other things. You can say it nicely, but it's actually really, really nice to hear a no, so you aren't wasting energy on someone who's not interested in giving. And we don't like to say no in our culture, but I think it's an important skill to learn. And
that I agree with you on for sure. So we're down to probably the last few minutes, 5 minutes or so. Maybe any other nuggets or tidbits you'd like to kind of share with our viewers and listeners before we wrap the day?
Again, I hate to be a broken record about kind of getting comfortable and identifying kind of what emotions are triggered when you think about money and being cognizant of those. Because if you're aware of your own triggers and biases and emotions, you're going to be a lot more empathetic with other people and understanding their stories. And then this is for, spouses. Like, your spouse has a different way of thinking about different habits around money. Maybe their money message was you've got to spend it on people. That's how you show your love. Whereas your money message might have been save it. That makes you a good person. So you've got to understand, it gives you a lot more empathy with your spouse, understanding that your children have a different money story. And then again, for advisors, I mean, this is a business of relationships. I mean, of course, the finances have to be, in line, and you want to be making money and you want to keep, your clients happy in that respect. But really what's driving all of it, the key here to having a good relationship with your client is to be able to see them as a person, understand their risk tolerance, understand their values, what they care about, who they are. So again, it's starting, letting down your own mask or being really human with the people that you work with, and that will pay off, because that connection that if it's really authentic, will be one that lasts.
Oh, fantastic. So I must say, this interview tells me that your therapeutic journey, writing the book and just experiencing what you've experienced, has got you to a much more comfortable place, just observing, how you talk about this. And I think it's a really, really important topic, for all the reasons why you've mentioned it. And I want to really thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to kind of be with us today, and to have shared with our audience kind of, some of your learnings along the way too. And for those of you listening, I would highly recommend that you get this book, We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth, authored by Jennifer Risher. Next month's guest will be Lorne McLean, who's King's Counsel, and he is the founder of McLean Law, which is a family law group, arguably the top group in Canada. So please do listen into that session next month. With that in mind, everybody, thanks for tuning in. See you next month. Bye-bye for now.
The comments and opinions expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. and should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF. The comments expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. And should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF.